So I'll begin with a story that I've told other people countless times, but will never tire of because of how much it affected and continues to affect me. One day in ninth grade, when I was 14, our AP World History teacher told us to talk to the person sitting next to us, and I think it was about how society should be run. It wasn't long before I discovered that my partner and I had very different beliefs about how society should be run. If I remember correctly, she told me that society should operate on a survival of the fittest mindset, in which people who were smarter and able to work harder and more efficiently would be able to survive. Those who couldn't would face harsh punishments. When I asked her how disabled and neurodiverse people would fit in this society, she said that they should be put in factories and camps to work for the more intelligent people because they couldn't be good and productive members of society. This way, they would eventually die out. I was taken aback. Hearing her say that about disabled and neurodiverse people made me wonder. If she knew I had ADHD, would her response be different? Would she think that I, who was also a student in a highly gifted program alongside her at school, should be put in a camp to toil away for the more intelligent people? To this day, I regret not saying anything directly to counter that. I regret not reporting that incident to the administration so that they could deal with it. 4 years later, as I retell this story again and again to other people, it hurts my heart. The reason I didn't say anything was that at the time, I thought that doing so would limit her freedom of speech, although now I understand that calling out someone for being harmful doesn't necessarily mean limiting their freedom of speech. But up till then, I had been keeping my ADHD a secret. When I was diagnosed with ADHD at 9 years old, my parents told me not to tell anyone I had it, except my teachers and classmates who also had ADHD. I couldn't even tell my best friend that I had ADHD. They feared that my friends who did not have ADHD would tell their parents, who would then tell them not to spend time with me anymore. Now I decided to reconsider. After telling my psychologist about the incident, she suggested that I tell other people I had ADHD, to break whatever stereotypes they had about people with ADHD. Then I thought about whether people in my class would ostracize me, and then after a while I figured out that since the highly gifted program had a good chunk of people with either ADHD or autism or another neurological condition, ostracization was virtually impossible. So after almost 5 years of hiding my condition, I finally publicly revealed that I had ADHD. And when I found out that I had autism a year later, I revealed that too. My intention behind doing this was to help combat harmful ideas about disability and neurodiversity and help others learn more about them. Neurodiversity, by the way, is the diversity in human brains and how they function. It was truly a liberating move to come out, because since then, I've learned a lot about what it means to have a disability and what it means to be neurodivergent. Now, one misconception which was clearly demonstrated in my classmates' view of how society should operate is that disability is automatically a death sentence. People think that disabled and neurodiverse people cannot have full and enriching lives. This is so blatantly untrue. People with disabilities inhabit every occupation. There are disabled people who are teachers, healthcare workers, scientists, developers, musicians, community organizers, and so on. These people include Itzhak Perlman, a famous classical violinist who has limited mobility in his legs as a result of contracting polio when he was 4 years old. And at Stanford University's School of Medicine is SMAC, which stands for Stanford Medicine Abilities Coalition, a group of people with disabilities and allies pursuing the field of medicine. Greta Thunberg, one of the most famous climate activists, if not the most famous, is autistic. Jessica Kellgren-Fozard is a deaf YouTuber with multiple disabilities who makes videos about vintage fashion, disability, and LGBTQ+ history. And finally, there's Jessica Benham, an autistic woman who was elected to the Pennsylvania state legislature during the 2020 election. Now, this is not to say that people with disabilities must have extraordinary accomplishments to prove their worth in society. Expecting disabled people to be superhuman is a harmful expectation. All of us have inherent worth, regardless of the scale of our achievements. But I mention these people because all of them demonstrate that not only can people with disabilities have fulfilling lives, but they can also gain positions of great influence. What Jessica Benham, Greta, and I all have, autism, is often considered an invisible disability, or a disability that is not immediately apparent. Which brings me to the next misconception I want to tackle, the idea that all disabilities are clearly visible. At the least, it can lead to people going undiagnosed for years, not knowing that the difficulties they're experiencing are related to a disability. They or their families might not think about being evaluated at all because they carry that misconception. Or people believe they can be ableist around others because they think there is no one who has a disability in the room. Now, let's go back to my classmate for a bit. My guess is that yes, her response would have been different if she knew I had ADHD, and I think part of that is due to the fact that ADHD for me is an invisible disability. Because I think it would have been different if I were using a wheelchair, for instance, because my disability would have been so obvious that I wouldn't have been able to keep it a secret. Because ADHD is an invisible disability for me, I could keep my ADHD a secret. I've heard people say in front of me to someone else, "You look like some ADD retarded kid," not knowing that I have ADHD. I've heard them say, "Your brother's autistic? I'm so sorry for your loss," comparing autism to cancer in front of me. At worst, the idea of disabilities needing to be visible leads to accusations of faking a disability. The most prominent example I can think of is an incident caught on video that happened during the time when the Black Lives Matter protests exploded after a police officer unjustly killed George Floyd. There was an incident in which protesters were looting Target and a white woman in a wheelchair appeared to be stabbing protesters or wielding a sharp object towards them. A video surfaced on the internet in which the woman appeared to be walking. That prompted outrage from many people on social media, including some racial justice activists I've met, who accused the woman of pretending to have a disability. While I don't condone the woman's actions towards the protesters, I believe that the accusations are unfair, considering what I've already discussed regarding invisible disabilities. You cannot automatically determine whether someone is disabled just by their appearance. Nor can you assume that disabilities present themselves in the same way all the time, which is another misconception that many people have. Many people who use wheelchairs use them part-time. These people can actually walk, but maybe only for limited periods of time. And then this assumption can also apply to neurodivergent conditions such as autism and ADHD. After I was diagnosed, I found out that some teachers wouldn't have suspected that I had ADHD until I told them. I think that's partly because I started taking medicine before school to improve my concentration, so the characteristics of ADHD aren't as prominent when I'm on medicine. Indeed, my parents say that I'm a completely different person when I'm on the medicine. And as for autism in my case, my symptoms can come and go. For example, one of the traits of autism is difficulty making eye contact. For me, sometimes it's easy to make eye contact, whereas other times it's extremely uncomfortable and hard. Many autistic people can act neurotypical on some days, and on other days their autistic traits show more. So that brings me to another reason you can't assume that someone doesn't have a disability based on their appearance. They might be deliberately covering it up. In the autistic community, this is called masking. This is a practice in which autistic people carefully observe and practice certain behaviors and suppress others to look more neurotypical, which describes anyone who doesn't have a neurological difference or disability. Basically, they're considered to have a normal brain. So, autistic people might suppress their stimming or repetitive movement, like moving their hands in a certain way, and they might either force eye contact or look at someone else's forehead to look like they are making eye contact. Masking can be exhausting. I've tried to do it, and many times I just give up after a few minutes. So I really admire the people who can sustain that kind of energy to do that. But they shouldn't have to, especially when many of the traits they're suppressing, such as lack of eye contact, aren't actually harmful. We shouldn't have to make eye contact. We shouldn't be labeled as unconfident or disrespectful if we don't make eye contact. We're just uncomfortable doing it. We shouldn't have to stop stimming, as long as it does not hurt us or another person, because stimming can help us self-soothe when we experience sensory overload. And if the stimming is injurious, people should help autistic people find a stim that is less dangerous, not make them stop stimming altogether. The stigma surrounding disability makes traits that are otherwise not harmful to be socially unacceptable. We disabled people are considered weird, and for that we are often treated as outcasts. I remember when I was diagnosed with ADHD at 9 years old, I was crying in the hospital because I thought that meant I was weird, as in unacceptable to society. Because I remember in elementary school hanging out with some people who were saying that they didn't like hanging around this other girl because she was so weird, and they were gossiping about her strange mannerisms. Now as I look back, I think there is a high likelihood that girl was neurodivergent, though I'm not sure. But back then, I did not want to be like her, so I cried. Which is why the silence around disability in the greater realm of social justice must end. Yes, we still have a long way to go when it comes to achieving equality across genders, races, sexual orientations, gender identities, and religion. Those areas aren't less important than disability. Yet, in my experience, mainstream activism talks about these identities far more than it talks about disability. I can't speak for anyone else other than myself, and I don't think this is always the case for LGBTQ plus people with disability, but I think it's very telling that in the area I live in, I was way more afraid to come out of the ADHD closet than I was afraid to say I was bisexual as a 13-year-old. After speaking with other LGBTQ plus people with disabilities, I can say that I'm not the only one who experienced this. As a disabled LGBTQ plus person, I often feel that in many areas there's more explicit support for the LGBTQ plus community than for the disabled community. The constant failure to include and center disabled people in mainstream activism leaves them out of the movement. I've told my fellow activists that something they said was ableist, or remind them that what they're doing isn't inclusive of disability. I've gone to activist events that would have been totally inaccessible to people with certain disabilities, like how one event was hosted on the second floor of a building that did not appear to have an elevator, so participants had to walk up the stairs. People don't consider what accommodations people with disabilities might need to access an event. I don't think they mean any harm, but excluding people with disabilities does a disservice to both us and the larger community. It means that disabled people who can't learn about certain issues affecting other groups of people or how to be a better activist in general, whatever problematic ideas they might have regarding these issues will remain unchecked, and movements lose opportunities to reach new people. Leaving disabled people out of activism also ensures that ableism continues in society. If you do not consider what accommodations people might need when planning an event, you're not doing anything to fight inaccessibility. And if you don't talk about the struggles that people with disabilities face in society, the stereotypes about us, the hostility towards us, the lack of accessibility, then other people won't know about these problems. And that's part of the reason I think ableism is still so prevalent in society, because a lot of people just don't know that these issues exist, so they don't fight the people and the structures that reinforce ableism. They don't interrogate what internalized ableist beliefs they themselves might have. If you help run an organization dedicated to social justice, whether that is uplifting women in STEM or fighting the climate crisis, ask yourself, what are you doing to make sure the information you're putting out reaches everyone? Are you captioning your videos and Instagram story takeovers for deaf and hard of hearing people? Are you providing image descriptions for your Instagram posts for blind people? Are you using high contrast color schemes for your infographics for people with low vision instead of using white body text on top of a pastel background? When you plan an in-person event, are you holding it in a wheelchair accessible space? Now, you might be wondering, what else can I do to uplift people with disabilities in my work? First, if you want to learn more about disability activism, I recommend you follow accounts such as disability_visibility, disabled culture, and disabled PhD on Instagram, as well as orgs such as the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Next, if your organization is about women in STEM, for example, one way is to seek disabled women in STEM to talk about their experiences at an event or an Instagram takeover. If your org is about fighting climate change, you can make a post about how climate change disproportionately impacts people with disabilities. Now, I won't lie and say that my disabilities don't pose problems for me that society can't fix. Due to my autism, for example, I sometimes fall into black and white thinking more often, which can be counterproductive sometimes, and sometimes it sucks to be able to remember a lot of things because the bad memories are more potent for me than they might be for someone else. And there are some disabilities out there that do cause a lot of physical pain. But in many cases, a lot of problems disabled people face could be eliminated if society did not try to cure us, but accept us more. Societal ableism hurts us. It can hold us back from getting jobs because employers' biases cause them to perceive us as incompetent, even if the disability in question doesn't negatively affect performance. If we already have the job, we might face a hostile workplace. It can hold us back from succeeding in education because of teachers and classmates who don't understand. They might label us as lazy or disrespectful. And the misconceptions that so many people, including several activists, hold about disability can make those of us with invisible disabilities afraid to reveal that part of ourselves for fear of ostracization and hostility from other people. More than ever, it is time to affirm that disabled people matter in society and shatter the stigma of disability. My disabilities are part of me. I won't let anyone take that away from me. Thank you.